In the first season of Netflix's Castlevania, we follow Trevor Belmont, a seasoned fighter and monster hunter who is the last of the ancient Belmont family that, despite defending the people of Wallachia for years, were exiled and excommunicated by the orders of the church, eventually leading to the destruction of their home and facing persecution by the very masses they had once sworn to protect. It was due to these events Trevor had gained an apathetic, cynical view of the world, showing little concern in pursuing the heroics of his ancestors and instead simply looking out for himself. He maintains this attitude even when learning the town of Greshit, and all of Wallachia for that matter, is in danger of being overrun by an enraged Dracula's army of night creatures, because as he puts it, the people had brought it upon themselves.
You feel no compassion?
This is what the church wanted. My family were the only people who could have fought Dracula and his army, but they didn't want us. They wanted to fight the darkness on their own terms. Good luck to them.
But the ordinary people of Wallachia, they didn't get a choice.
For evil bastards to win power, all ordinary people have to do is stand aside and keep quiet. There's always a choice.
Trevor's ancestors had been fighting against the supernatural evils plaguing Wallachia for generations. They fought for this country, bled for this country, and likely even died for it too. But instead of gratitude or thankfulness for their efforts and their sacrifices, they instead had their ancestral home razed to the ground while the people paraded their destruction. It's easy to see why Trevor had developed such a bitter attitude towards the people, and why he's so reluctant to help them, since no one ever came to his family's defenses as they were being hunted down like dogs.
The Belmonts dealt in black magic. The Belmonts dealt with monsters.
The Belmonts fought monsters, son.
The few times he does show a willingness to help others, it's only to those who are also discriminated by the church, specifically the Speakers, a group of nomadic scholars who came to Greshit to help the people from the looming demonic threat, despite the church trying to frame them as the ones responsible for the constant plague of night creatures, with the corrupted bishop stirring up Greshit's citizens into an angry mob and sending them and his priests to drive the Speakers out from the town or have them executed. Trevor tries to get the Speakers to leave, but they decline, refusing to turn their back on the people of Greshit in their hour of need, believing if there's still any shred of good and decency and humanity left in the world, they will see that they simply wish to help. But Trevor doesn't have such faith. He believes the Speaker's mission is suicidal, that they are fighting a losing battle. But Sypha and her grandfather believe otherwise and criticize his jaded outlook.
Does one run away when someone tells lies about them? What have the church said about the Belmonts? That you have been corrupted by dealings with the supernatural? That you mock God? That you are a threat to the common good and that evil follows wherever you go? And what did you do in the face of that?
I didn't run away.
Really? So what are you running to? Did you have a destination in mind?
Are you calling me a coward?
No. I am calling you defeated, Trevor Belmont.
While he may have given up on the people of Wallachia and had withdrawn from his duties as a Belmont, they still believe there is something far greater to fight for.
But if nothing else, we might show someone that although battles are won and lost, there is a larger war at stake.
With Dracula's armies?
No. A war for the soul of our people. Because if we truly are the sort of people who will kill one another at the behest of a madman's fantasies, then perhaps it is right and proper that things from hell should rise up to wipe us out.
It's this willingness to fight, this courage to not back down even when against such overwhelming odds that reminds Trevor of his own family, and this reignites his heroic passions, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves against evil, much like the Belmonts before him. And when the mobs led by the priests come for the Speakers only to instead find Trevor Belmont, they question why he would risk his life for a bunch of strangers, and he says this.
Absolutely nothing.
So you're going to die for nothing? For people you don't know?
I don't know any of you, but that doesn't matter, does it? My family, the family you demonized and excommunicated, has fought and died through generations for this country. We do this thing for Wallachia and her people. We don't have to know you all. We do it anyway. And it's not the dying that frightens us. It's never having stood up and fought for you. I am Trevor Belmont, of the House of Belmont. and dying has never frightened me.
It's easy for Trevor to look the other way, to not get involved in this conflict and continue living his days as a drunkard who only looks after himself. But he can't, because deep down, despite all the bitterness, the nihilism, and the cynicism, it's within his nature to protect people who are in need. The guilt of having not done anything far outweighing the fear of death in facing this angry mob or the approaching night creatures that seek to rip them apart. This is a great scene that shows tremendous growth in Trevor's character, a defining moment where he decides to no longer let his cynical outlook define him and to instead pick up his whip once more in service of the people of Wallachia and fight back against the evil that threatens to consume them all. It's just a shame that this is where his characterization peaks and the series struggles to do anything with him later on, focusing instead on other subplots and characters whose stories don't go anywhere of note or have an unsatisfying ending. Except for Isaac, because he's the best character. With Trevor being shoved to the sidelines until the very end, where they pit him against Death, an ancient, powerful entity who was thrown into the story at the last minute with little foreshadowing and carries himself with the sophistication and gravitas of your average Call of Duty player.
I'm going to eat your soul, shit it out, and use it to smother your fucking girlfriend to death.
With dialogue that desperately tries to draw something meaningful from this battle, but you'd have better luck drawing blood from a stone.
You're only an old killer. You don't make anything, you don't live. You just eat and hide.
Is there a point to this? Are you dictating your fucking obituary to me, Belmont?
It's time to give this place back to people who know how to build things. You and me, we're just killers out of history. It's time for us to go.
Trevor's speech about them both being killers makes no sense, since Trevor has only ever killed night creatures and vampires that have threatened humanity, while Death is seeking to bring back Dracula to continue his mass genocide and feed on the death and suffering it would bring. This attempt to parallel the two falls laughably short and isn't helped by Trevor's lack of screen time, nor ever establishing any hints or indications of Trevor having these thoughts about himself that could be referenced. One would think that these mistakes would have served as hard lessons for future projects regarding this IP, yet here we are with the series' latest entry, Castlevania Nocturne, a sequel series that continues all the same failures of its predecessor that sadly doesn't have the benefit of having the same well-established characters to carry the poorly written narrative, with a particular fight scene that I firmly believe condenses all the failing elements and wasted potential of this story in one contained moment, Richter versus the Hunters, a scene that, much like Trevor with protecting the speakers, is meant to be this big defining character moment where Richter is reinvigorated with a newfound resolve to fight once more, which is further emphasized with the reawakening of his magical powers. Because you see, dear viewers, while this scene may carry many elements that mirrors Trevor's, it sadly rings hollow in comparison due to being held back from being something truly meaningful by its many poor writing decisions. Allow me to explain. Richter Belmont is the last living Belmont, but not really. We'll touch on that later. In his youth, he witnessed his mother's death at the hands of an especially powerful vampire named Olrox, despite his best attempts to assist her with his magic. It was only through Olrox's willingness to show mercy that he survived, and since that day, he has trained to be an efficient vampire hunter. Raised alongside his childhood friend, a young witch and revolutionary leader named Maria, and her mother Tara, a former speaker magician, the two being the closest thing Richter has had to family since his mother's death. It's also because of this event he lost his ability to wield magic, something we'll touch on later. Due to circumstances, Richter and Maria get involved in a mission with another magician and revolutionary leader named Annette and her companion Edward to help them defeat a powerful and cruel vampire named Elizabeth Bathory, who wishes to stomp out the revolution and bring an eternal night where vampires will rule supreme. She also has a dark history with Tara, who reveals that Elizabeth had kidnapped, tortured, and turned her sister into a vampire for her own amusement. This information further drives Richter to Annette's cause, wanting to avenge Tara's sister, though despite their best efforts to combat this evil, our heroes face one failure after another, with one of their missions leading to the death of Edward and having him turned into a night creature. It's only after fighting off another horde of night creatures that ruined their attempt to rally the people do they discover the monstrosities were retreating to the Abbey, and deduce that's where they're coming from. Also, Annette recognizes Edward as a night creature, but nothing significant comes from it because Castlevania Nocturne likes to stretch out as much time on plotlines that go nowhere as I do burning money on FGO. So our heroes infiltrate the abbey through a secret passage, and it's here they discover that not only is the abbot making night creatures, but he's also working with Elizabeth's vampire servants. A fight ensues where Richter manages to defeat one of the vampires, and after dropping this gem of a line,
"Who's fucking next?"
Olrox appears, and upon seeing this old foe, Richter immediately loses his nerve and runs away, abandoning everyone in the midst of a fight. The rest of the group quickly flees with him, but once out of danger, Richter is nowhere to be seen, having fled to a lake where he proceeds to have a breakdown, all the pain and trauma from his childhood having resurfaced upon seeing the face of his mother's killer. However, we don't get to focus on this for too long, and next we see Richter, he's walking around town, talking with children and later on trying to get a meal. It's here he meets a mysterious old man who, after dealing with a vampire, reveals he's Richter's grandfather, Joost Belmont. The two have a talk where Joost tells him that he was once a powerful sorcerer, and the Belmont's affinity for magic comes from their ancient ancestor Sypha, though much like Richter, he lost his magic after he failed to protect someone he loved, specifically his wife and friend, who died at the hands of a vampire. And when Richter tries to bring up his mother, Joost proceeds to tell Richter that it's pointless to fight this evil. Whether it be a Dracula or an Urzabed or even an Olrox, there will always be more evil that will be greater, more powerful, that will kill the people he loves dearest because evil always wins. That's, comforting, I suppose. Hey, Richter, sorry I wasn't there for you or your mother, but have you considered life doesn't matter and you should just consider I can't finish this joke. I honestly just feel bad for any potential Castlevania game fans who had any interest in Juice, seeing that they've turned him into a washed-up old hermit who's simply consumed by nihilism and bitterness.
Boy, why does that sound familiar?
Right, this is supposed to be about Richter. Getting back to that. So the two are attacked by a group of vampires who make quick work of the Belmonts. Once Richter and Juice are restrained, the leader of the group then begins to taunt Richter, telling him how Urzabet will slowly torture and eventually turn his family and friends into vampires. The notion invokes memories of his dying mother, reminding Richter of how powerless he had felt at that time, how all he could do was sit there and simply watch, unable to do anything as life drained from her eyes. Tears fall from his face as the leader levels his gun at him, ready to execute him as Richter's mind floods with images of his friends and loved ones. We begin to hear the drumming of his heartbeat as flickers of blue fire dance around his form until suddenly there is an explosion of magic as he cries out in defiance. Richter, now free, stands, the blue fire from before coating his body but not harming him. One of the vampires attempts to attack, lunging forward with his weapon, but Richter catches it, his arms now covered in thick sheets of ice that absorb the blow, and the show's iteration of divine bloodline begins to play as Richter unleashes a torrent of fire that leaves his attacker a smoldering, burning corpse. With his new magical powers, Richter manages to defeat the remaining vampires, with his resolve stronger than ever, because despite the overwhelming, endless evil that plagues the world, despite that it might be easier to just throw in the towel, he can't. There are people he still wishes to protect, people he loves who he will continue to fight for, to defend, and he won't let his fears get the better of him again. Such is the Belmont way. Which, hey, that's a nice little concept, and this is one of the few fight scenes in Castlevania Nocturne that doesn't make me want to claw my eyes out.
What the fuck is this piece of shit?
I hope you enjoyed that, by the way, because that's all the positives I had to say in regards to this fight. Because frankly, if you sit and think about it, a lot of the components to make this all come together aren't really there. And in truth, this scene that is meant to be this big, character-driven moment for Richter is a bunch of wasted potential that feels incredibly unearned and insincere. Let's start with Richter Belmont and his characterization, or more, the lack thereof, because frankly, he doesn't have much going on. Yes, there's the whole trauma behind his mother being killed and his connections to Tara and Maria, but these are both barely touched upon, getting at most a few scenes and a handful of lines dedicated to them up until this very moment. And even then, these scenes barely explore anything because the show is far too busy trying to chug the plot along and juggle its bloated cast of mostly OCs. I mean, Annette gets a whole fucking episode dedicated to her backstory, her relationships, her motivations, and how she gets her powers. All stuff that was already established while Richter just gets a bunch of scraps! And while I'm not against fleshing out other characters, it's frustrating that this same amount of time and effort isn't being put into one of the main characters. Richter is so poorly established after the show's intro, I just don't really get an idea or sense of who he is. He just seems like he's there, a passenger along for the ride for whatever machinations the other characters are getting up to, instead of an active agent in what is supposed to be his story. I'm also not a fan of his sudden proficiency with magic, or how powerful he is with it too. As mentioned prior, Richter was able to wield magic as a child, however he forgot how to use it, most likely because of a mental blockage he had developed from his trauma, but we never really get a clear answer on this, so it could be anyone's guess.
The priestess told me you could do magic.
I could, when I was a kid.
What happened?
I don't know.
The point is, Richter has not practiced magic in years, which is a bit strange given he grew up alongside two magic users. Like, did Tara just never make an attempt to train or help him? It's a shame because he could have done something with this and used it to characterize Richter further. Like, I don't know, maybe because his magic failed in stopping Olrox from killing his mother, he elected to give it up completely in favor of more efficient tools that wouldn't fail him. And maybe later, after they meet, have Juice train Richter and show him how to harness his magical power. Something that would have at least given this more plausibility. But instead, we skip all that training and potential character building to get to the cool action scene. But in doing so, this raises a bunch of questions. Like, why was Richter able to remove his mental blockade now? Because his family and friends were being threatened? So why didn't this happen here? Or here? Or here? Why couldn't Juice, who suffers from a similar issue, do this when Richter was about to be killed in front of him? This is especially frustrating because Richter doesn't seem to have an answer for this.
I can do magic again.
I noticed. How did it happen?
I don't know. Because I had to. I have to live.
Because the truth is that this was just a massive deus ex machina to get Richter out of this situation. And sadly, this hasn't been the first instance where this writing problem has reared its ugly head, nor will it be the last either. There's also the fact that despite his lack of training and not having used magic in almost a decade, Richter is incredibly skilled at it from the get-go, able to wield both fire and ice with such precise skill it gives the show's other established magicians like Maria or Tara a run for their money. It's just insane to me because for years he's been unable to use his magic because of the mental blockage rooted by his trauma, and by removing it, something that should have taken a great deal of time or at least given far more attention than what we got, he's able to wield his magic with shockingly little effort, managing to wipe out his enemies with ease, which is just incredibly unsatisfying and feels unearned because Richter never really had to work to achieve this power or overcome his trauma. It was simply granted to him by the writers. But they are certainly going to try as hard as they can to convince you otherwise, for the show later on treats Richter like he's developed or changed, that he now knows what it means to be a Belmont.
Oh. How did that happen?
A bunch of vampires tracked me, hunted me down. I don't know. I was helpless. Like I was a child again.
But we're not children anymore.
No. When I had nothing to hold on to and everything was gone, I remembered the things that make me who I am. The hopes, the pain, and the shit. The love in this house. And I suppose for the first time, I really made a choice about the kind of person I want to be. A Belmont.
Though this falls short because Richter hasn't changed at all. He was always fighting for his family and showed a willingness to defend people, constantly trying to protect them from the supernatural evils that threatened to wish them harm. Even when Richter considers the idea of giving up, this is barely entertained, because the very next scene when he encounters a vampire, he shows no hesitation to fight again and would have gotten out his whip and dealt with him had Juice not swiped it off his person. It certainly doesn't help that you don't ever really get an idea of where Richter's headspace is after his breakdown either. One would presume he'd probably be in a defeated state, feeling hopeless and maybe ashamed for running away and abandoning his family in their time of need. You'd think he would be reluctant to fight another vampire, but this isn't shown to be the case. He even criticizes Juice about how Belmonts don't fight vampires for money or hide away in a hut. So again, this feels less like a developing moment for Richter where he finally learns what it means to be a Belmont, and is more just going back to doing what he is already doing, except he's not scared of Olrox anymore. anymore, which, considering how quickly the show blitzed through his development, completely undermines the entire weight of Richter's trauma, given how quickly he bounced back from his initial breakdown. And honestly, I feel like it just ended here. This scene that is meant to be this big moment where Richter overcomes his trauma and becomes the hero he needs to be falls incredibly short due to how poorly established Richter is, how little it actually develops his character despite making efforts to say otherwise, and how the narrative rushes these events to get back into the action with new powers that he hardly worked to earn, robbing this development of anything meaningful. But I'm far from done, because the bad writing does not end there. For you see, dear viewer, there is more I wish to show, to fully emphasize the point of how poorly put together this whole sequence is, and highlight the potential that was squandered. For starters, there's the massive convenience of Richter running into Juiced in the first place. You're telling me in this massive town with hundreds if not thousands of people occupying it, Richter by chance managed to walk into the one establishment Juiced is currently occupying? What makes it worse is that Juiced, who is trying to keep his presence a secret from Richter, just outs himself by buying him dinner and later taking his whip to deal with the vampire. The show tries to explain that he does all this because he's under the impression Tara has told Richter about him, but Richter's questions obviously suggest that this isn't the case.
Hey! Hey! Who are you?
Aren't you supposed to be clever?
What?
That's what Julia always said.
Who are you?
I'm Just.
Juiced who?
Yet Juice still decides to reveal himself, but still blames Tara later on.
I'm gonna kill Tara.
I came to this country when I was 10, knowing absolutely nobody, and if it wasn't for Auntie Tara, who isn't really my auntie, more some sort of third cousin 1,000 times removed.
We had a fucking deal.
What do you mean you're gonna kill her?
She promised not to tell you where to find me.
What are you talking about?
You mean she didn't tell you?
Did I mention that the writing in this show is absolute piss? Another thing that bothered me during this whole debacle is that Richter never went back to check up on Maria or Tara after recollecting himself. Something that he should be doing, considering the source of Richter's trauma comes from witnessing the death of a family member. Yet despite knowing that he had left his adopted family in the middle of a battle with several powerful vampires, he makes no attempt to see if they're okay. A bit concerning, considering the looming vampire threat. You could maybe make the argument that he didn't come back to them sooner because he felt ashamed for leaving them, but even this is a reach because there's nothing to suggest or support this to be the case. The first thing that should be going through Richter's mind once he's recovered is going to see if Maria and Tara are okay. Could you imagine the possible drama and angst you could draw out of Richter seeing Maria hurt? The guilt of seeing a girl that he's come to see as a sister harmed and feeling responsible for it because he couldn't protect her like he couldn't protect his mother. Feeling the dread of losing his family all over again. But no, we waste all this time to have him instead talk with fucking teenagers who try to hit on him. Speaking of, we also have Richter put on his classic headband, which doesn't really hold any significance here because he got this from said flirting girls who don't know what a fraternity means.
I just can't do it. I can't take this shit no more, man.
You see what I mean about wasted potential? They could have done something with this headband, have a scene with any of the other characters to give it some meaning, some sort of symbolism that would matter, but it's fucking wasted. I can't draw anything from the importance of him putting this headband on or why he would to begin with, outside of it being something fans of the game will recognize. And then there's the final line. As he stands over the last vampire, ready to destroy him with his powerful magic, does he drop a cool one-liner? Maybe an oath about how he won't let himself be afraid again? Or maybe the classic "die monster, you don't belong in this world"? No, because that would be cringe and corny and lame, and Castlevania Nocturne isn't any of those things. No, Richter says something truly badass.
I was going to say something witty and cutting and brutal before I finished you off. But fuck it.
That's right. He said fuck it. Because we're motherfucking Castlevania, people. A dark fucking fantasy made by fucking Netflix. And we have to use the word fuck in every single fucking speech and fucking line in the show to show how fucking mature and fucking dark we are. Fuck. God, that made me cringe. There was a time I wouldn't have minded the use of the word fuck here and there, specifically when it was Trevor, you know, the person who was characterized to be foul-mouthed, vulgar, and speak in a rude manner, until everybody started doing it, and now it's long lost its charm and overstayed its welcome.
Fuck. Fucking. Fucking. Fuckers. Fucking. Fuck. Fucking.
Fuck. Fucking.
Fucking.
Fucking. Fuck.
Fucking.
Fucking.
Fuckers. Fucking.
Fucking. Fucking.
Fucking. Fuck.
Fucking shit, hairy arse, words, giant slimy balls, shit!
And it's especially bad here, with Richter dropping a fuck every episode and the villain giving this long-winded speech where she drops a fuck twice in between it. I would almost laugh from how desperate this constant attempt to appear mature was, if it wasn't for the depressing fact that this has become the norm for the fantasy genre as of late. And that's it. That's the scene. Richter has one last talk with Juiced, giving a joke answer about how he was able to reawaken his magic when Juiced couldn't because he was younger, then later arrives just in time to save Maria and Tara from vampires. Quite convenient that this didn't happen while he was wandering about town or hanging out with Juiced. Probably would have had some major consequences if it had, but hey, whatever, I've basically tuned out at this point. And that's all we get for Juiced too, despite being shown to be a capable fighter who could potentially help Richter and company against his upcoming vampire threat, but instead he decides he'd rather live in his shitty outhouse like a hermit, and I guess let the world die because what's the point? I feel really bad for Juice fans. And yeah, other than that, it's just a meaningless fight scene that doesn't really do anything to add on to Richter's character outside of giving him some neat powers that feel unearned. But Skoroy, it looks so cool! Yeah, I suppose, if you want to turn your brain off and watch the flashy colors, but I do want to point out you can have a scene that is emotionally resonating, visually appealing, and still strongly written, right? Anyone can make a big, flashy fight scene with a bunch of explosions and colors and emotions, but it all means little if it doesn't make sense, doesn't mean anything. Even the old Castlevania understood this. Well, it did for a time. But in the case of Richter versus the Hunters, it's just a meaningless, flashy spectacle with a poorly established protagonist fighting a bunch of nameless mooks who don't matter, and ending with a poorly written F-bomb that simply pulls me out, reminding me once again that I'm not watching something profound or entertaining. I am watching Castlevania Nocturne, a product made by people who clearly want to write their own story with their own characters, instead of focusing on the plight of the Belmonts and their fight against the supernatural. You know, the things that made Castlevania Castlevania, and I can only hope that these writers' desires to sink their claws onto something far more meaningful will never come to fruition. Also, Richter can't count for shit.
I left all 6 of them in a pile of ashes.
You failed!